Welcome to Beyond the Surface podcast. My name is Ethan Carter, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. Today, we're diving into something pretty much all of us struggle with: procrastination. You know, that incredibly frustrating thing where you know exactly what you need to do, you know exactly why it's important, you even know how to do it, but for some reason, you still just don't do it. You tell yourself, okay, I'm going to start tomorrow. Tomorrow is definitely the day. But then, well, tomorrow comes, and you say it again. And then tomorrow becomes next week, and then next month, and suddenly it's next year. And before you know it, you spent way more time and energy just agonizing over the task than it would have actually taken just to sit down and do it. It's this universal human struggle, right? But it's one we rarely actually understand on a deeper level. So let's really dive into this, because asking this next question is where everything kind of shifts. What if the real reason we delay things actually has absolutely nothing to do with discipline at all? I mean, society has conditioned us to believe that if we put things off, we're just lazy, right? We lack willpower. We don't have enough grit. But what if that entire framework is just completely wrong? I really want to invite you to challenge that surface level assumption with me today. Because if we actually want to break this cycle of delaying our goals, and honestly delaying our lives, we have to look deeper. We have to go beyond the surface and figure out what is actually happening in our minds when we pull away from the things we really want to achieve. And here is where we need to completely dispel the biggest lie we tell ourselves. The problem isn't time management. It's just not. The problem isn't that you don't have enough hours in the day or that you somehow lack the physical capability to do the work. Just think about it for a second. The exact same person who literally can't bring themselves to open a book to start studying can easily sit there and spend 3 straight hours scrolling through social media, right? The same person who avoids working on that dream business plan can somehow spend an entire evening binge watching videos without breaking a sweat. So the issue clearly isn't a lack of energy or ability. You have focus, you have energy. The problem is just that you can't do the thing that matters most. And that is because procrastination isn't a time problem, it's an emotional problem. This is a massive paradigm shift. You are not actually avoiding the task itself. You're avoiding the feeling associated with the task. You aren't avoiding the physical act of typing out an assignment on your keyboard. You're avoiding the stress of figuring out what to say. You aren't avoiding launching that new business idea. You're avoiding the terrifying possibility of failure. You aren't avoiding the gym. You're avoiding the physical discomfort, or maybe even the potential embarrassment of feeling out of shape. We are emotional creatures, and our brains are quite literally hardwired to move away from pain and toward pleasure. Once you realize you're running from an emotion and not just a chore, it completely changes how you approach your own resistance. Because think about it, every single meaningful task comes with some kind of emotional weight. Sure, some tasks bring excitement and joy, but the really important ones, the ones that force us to grow, they usually bring anxiety. They bring fear, heavy self-doubt, and deep uncertainty. And when your brain senses that discomfort, it immediately sounds an alarm. It starts looking for an escape hatch, craving immediate relief. That is exactly why scrolling on your phone feels so incredibly easy in that moment. That's why entertainment becomes infinitely more attractive when you have a big deadline approaching. Procrastination feels tempting because, well, it works. It gives you immediate temporary relief from a negative emotion. Your brain actually thinks it's doing you a huge favor by rescuing you from stress and dropping you right into the comfort of a distraction. Let's be brutally honest with ourselves here for a minute. So often, procrastination is really just fear wearing a different outfit. It's the fear of failure. It's the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment. Or maybe it's that deep, quiet fear of discovering that you're just not as good as you hoped you were. These are deep psychological wounds we're desperately trying to avoid triggering. So instead of trying your absolute hardest and risking the pure devastation of a disappointment, you just delay. You put it off. Because the subconscious logic here is kind of brilliant in a twisted way. If you never fully try, you never actually have to fully fail. You can always just tell yourself, well, I could have done it perfectly if I had just given myself a little more time. So procrastination basically acts as this very strange, twisted form of self-protection. Your mind is trying to build a fortress around your ego to keep it safe from all that judgment and failure. But here is the tragic reality of that. That fortress, it eventually becomes a prison. And this self-protection comes at a massive, heavy cost. Because while you're so busy protecting your ego, you're actively sacrificing your own growth. You are missing out on life-changing opportunities. And ironically, by avoiding the things that make you anxious, you are slowly, day by day, chipping away at your own confidence. Every single time you delay, you send a subtle little message to your own brain that says, I can't handle this. And over time, sadly, that becomes your core identity. So the absolutely crucial question is, how do we break out of this cycle?
Well, most people just sit around waiting until they suddenly feel motivated or confident enough to begin. They think, oh, I'll start my diet when I feel motivated, or I'll write that chapter when inspiration finally strikes. But honestly, motivation is entirely unreliable. Some days you'll have it, but most days you just won't. The people who actually make massive progress in life aren't the ones who are constantly motivated. They are the people who take action anyway, despite feeling anxious, despite feeling tired. We have to completely flip the script here. Confidence doesn't come before action. Confidence comes after action. The more promises you keep to yourself, the more evidence you give your own mind that you can actually be trusted. And that right there is exactly how true self-worth and confidence grow. One imperfect action at a time.
So let's get into the actionable playbook. How do we practically do this? Number 1, stop waiting to feel ready. You have to accept right now that you may never feel completely ready. And you know what? That is perfectly okay. Do it unready. Number 2, make the tasks smaller. This is absolutely vital for tricking your brain's threat response system. If studying for 3 hours feels incredibly overwhelming and spikes your anxiety, don't study for 3 hours. Just commit to studying for 10 minutes. If writing a whole book feels utterly impossible, just write one single paragraph. If going to the gym for this massive, exhausting workout feels like way too much, make your only goal to just put on your shoes and drive to the parking lot. Just show up. You want to lower the barrier to entry so much that it's actually harder to say no than to just do it. And that leads us perfectly into the third step, which is tied to this really beautiful concept, momentum. You need to focus only on starting, not on finishing, because the anticipation of the work is almost always worse than the work itself. Starting is literally the absolute hardest part, because that is when your emotional resistance is at its highest peak. But once you push through that initial wall of discomfort, once you write that very first messy sentence or do that first awkward stretch, momentum naturally takes over. It's this incredibly powerful psychological force. You suddenly realize the water isn't nearly as cold as you thought it was, and boom, that 10-minute study session effortlessly turns into an hour, entirely on its own. I really, really want you to internalize this core truth today. You are not lazy. You are human. You have a brain that is desperately trying to protect you from things that feel scary or uncomfortable, and you are just avoiding discomfort the exact same way millions of other people do every single day. There is absolutely no shame in that. But while validating your feelings is important, it doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in them. Awareness is just the first step. Every single time you recognize that familiar urge to pull away and you consciously choose action over avoidance anyway, you are actively rewriting your own internal programming. You become a little bit stronger, a little more disciplined, and a little more deeply connected to your true potential. It doesn't require some massive overnight transformation. It really just requires a slight shift in how you view your own resistance. Those tiny, everyday moments of bravery, choosing to write just one sentence, choosing to step out the front door, choosing to face the discomfort head-on, they compound. And over time, those small choices completely change the entire trajectory of your life. If this conversation made you think differently, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Beyond the Surface podcast, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep thinking deeper, keep seeing differently, and keep going beyond the surface.